makes her just sick all over. You know,
Yeah,
and
oh, I
just-
can
She
imagine.
can't stand, and that's how she fell and broke her foot.
Yeah.
Oh.
So she had that, you know, because she tried to get out there.
Well, give her our best. Are you gonna talk to her later?
Pardon me?
I said, give her our best. I assume you're gonna talk to her later?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, we text. She doesn't hear real well on the phone,
Yeah.
so we don't really get too much from her.
Yeah, texting's gotta be a good option then.
Yeah, so I
See,
will let her.
I hate texting, but for that I could see it.
Yeah. I used to
You
not
guys
like
do?
it, but now I can see the advantages of it. It's, you know, if you just got a second and you don't have time for a whole big conversation,
email, yeah.
it really is. Especially people like me that don't check their
Long time.
emails often.
Well, I get my emails on my phone.
40 years?
Well,
Over
you know,
40.
they come
Over
on
40.
there.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
But
we
I
could
just-
50 if we married
You
when
know,
we
I
met.
prefer
mean, when
looking at them on
started
my
living together.
laptop, but I can look at them on my phone, even when I'm on my phone. You know,
I do everything on my phone.
Well,
I
well,
think
a lot
some
of stuff I
people,
wanna print, or,
They,
it's so hard for
from
me
what I
to see on
understand, the
there.
key
I
to
just
longevity in
like
a
so I can
marriage
see
is
and
two
get
words from
there's
the
a lot of people though that
Yes,
don't even
dear.
have a.
I know.
I think Mark,
got
Harwell, I'm pretty sure all he uses is his phone.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends that's what they do.
That's
like-
really all I use.
And my laptop is getting old.
But like you, I don't, a lot of times it's hard to read things on the
Oh,
phone.
yeah, and that's what I have trouble
Oh,
with.
there.
Hello. Did you?
She's here. Shh.
No.
You didn't usher today, I wondered, at the thing. Last night you were ushering at the program.
Oh,
No.
no, I didn't have to.
Okay, I wondered, I called you that, you're giving out stuff.
Oh.
Progress.
So now where's Judy gonna sit?
I don't know, we'll have to change around.
No, she's not.
Is she not, is she sick still?
Yeah, she's, her
Not feeling good now.
PPV, is that how you say it?
Yeah, PPV, I had that, it's
So she's-
vertigo.
Yeah, she's
Yeah,
having a
it's
little bit.
crazy, but you can get rid of it, but you have to turn upside down off your bed, or you have to be on a platform.
Yeah, she said that's
It's
one of her
benign,
doctor-
yeah, I have a thing of how you do it to get rid of it. I had the elder once. It
Where
was
you can try to
crazy.
do it yourself?
Oh, yeah,
kinda?
you can get rid of it yourself.
Oh,
And
wow.
the key to it is drinking water though, because the doctor told me that. We get dehydrated as we get older.
Yeah.
And it's called
There's
benign.
a lot.
Oh,
to
no,
that.
it's big that, and your crystals get messed up, they get like stuck instead of floating through your head, and they get like almost fainted. So it's benign vertigo, something progressive, but benign vertigo, so it's not
Well,
anything that.
If stuff was floating in my head, it'd have
That's
it'd
the
have lots
best
of room.
Benign.
Nothing in there.
Yeah, it's not, right, it's not the vertigo.
Because I know she
Sort
has
of
the
like
vertigo,
outer
she has
space.
the ears.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Oh,
it's
those
painful.
Yeah, you can't, other vertigo, that's a chronic thing. Every one of the ladies, April wants to come to lunch, and your friend April. You're gonna stand
Well, then
up.
I'm standing.
I know.
You get a nice spot. Oh, wait, I don't have
You
one.
have,
Right, I don't have one.
Oh, you're the, yeah.
Ladies,
What does it mean
When's that?
to say benign
Seven.
vertigo?
Well, it's
Because
not
the
the
opposite
chronic.
would be
Oh, no, I
malignant.
mean, I
yeah,
got
everything
the
is
other
like
one.
chronic.
Oh, that's right.
So this is
Get over
benign.
it. Yeah.
You don't
progressive,
think
like
of
a
next week, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like next week.
Well, I thought the
Just
opposite of
odd.
benign was
And then-
malignant.
No,
Then
But
it's
well,
not,
then
not
it's-
in this case.
not in this case, but it means that it's chronic. If people have vertigo and are too, that's a whole different ballgame than this. Yeah.
All right, well, let's get started.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Comes, she comes, that'll be great. Okay,
Oh, Tim.
so little house cleaning. So next week, we are not meeting. Enjoy your Thanksgiving or your shopping or sleeping, whatever it is you do. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna try to finish, so I'm gonna try to finish all of the outlines for part 2 this week. Yes.
Wow.
I won't be here until after the first of the year.
You're gonna be gone the whole
You
time.
go,
Okay, all right.
well, here's the thing, what you're gonna miss.
I know.
Ed
I'm
will,
already reading.
yeah, well, Ed will be here, the
The
8th.
Oh,
I
really?
spoke
Oh,
with him.
well, I'll be here the
Are you here the 8th?
Oh, yeah, I'll be here the 8th.
Oh,
I
good.
talked,
I won't be here the 8th.
oh, okay.
Oh,
I will be here the 8th.
oh, good
Okay.
to hear it.
Well, he's coming the 8th, I'm sorry. You can watch it.
I'm leaving
Oh,
the
yeah.
11th.
Okay.
Okay.
You're not going to Thanksgiving?
No.
He'll video it,
Yeah.
and you can watch it.
I'm
So-
staying
so-
home for Thanksgiving.
Okay.
I'll tell you, I don't know what Ed will say. I gave him the outline, I told him how we roll, I said, do whatever you want. Your topic is the age of the earth, and I mean he's great. He's done this before, and I mean it'll be highly technical, but just like if I'm teaching, disturb him.
We'll look lost at his vernacular.
Well, it'll be great.
He'll sit here and go like this, so he thinks we understand what he's saying.
So what we're going to do tonight is we're starting on page 9.
9.
All right, and so what we're into right now is really starting to talk about the other theories of creation, and and it comes down to two things. All right, you can break it into two really large chunks. The first is secular theories, which take God completely out of it. All right? Well, great. Just throw that one over there for a second. Then what we get is this, we have taken the place of God created the world, all right? And we take the biblical stance. And then you got the secular stance over here that says, ain't no God, all right? And then you've got this middle section, which is theistic evolution. And theistic evolution is basically this compromise, all right, that comes in a couple of different flavors, all right? We talked a little bit the last time about the people that said, basically, God came, he created it, he left, okay? That's one. God came, he created, he left, and every once in a while he came back. All right?
See how we're doing.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. How's it going? So the theory that God guided the process of evolution, we take this evolution, proposed by Darwin, though God created matter in the beginning, created life in its simplest form, and created man, and then left. Okay? And that is some very prevailing thought process in the church today. All right, now we use these terms conservative and liberal, and it's not a political term. Okay, so some of your liberal theologians who want to go towards the world because, hey, it's easier then. I mean, and I'm being critical on purpose when I say that. It's easier to go towards the world because then you can have the pretty marketing thing, you have the prosperity gospel, you can have all that stuff. So it's like, I don't want to disagree with you, I don't want to offend you, I don't want to hurt your feelings. No. Because if you look at theistic evolution, it basically goes into the same problem as Darwinism, which is, I don't care if you say God created it and left and then evolution happened, then it's random. Everything is random at that point. God is not random whatsoever. He has a purpose for everything that he created. And I am completely off the outline, and that's okay.
No.
Tonight's going to be a little bit different from that aspect. So the thing that you have to look at is, do you want to put your stake in the ground of theistic evolution, which takes this compromise.
Yeah.
And this is different than old earth, young earth, okay? We can have a discussion on young earth, old earth, and have a great discussion because the Bible's not clear on it. Yeah. Where this gets into is basically saying, well, evolution, that's how God did it. Well, no, because if you say survival of the fittest, then you're saying God sat there and said, let me create all of the beast of the world. And it took me about 4 million tries until I got to the one that was good. Okay? Or if it's survival of the fittest, well, then what do you have? I mean, shoot, the dinosaurs, they would just eat us all up, right?
Yeah.
They would be survival of the fittest. So, I mean, you've got all of this stuff. You really can't hold the position of theistic evolution and hold to the Bible, because what Scripture says is totally different than anything evolution says. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm making some very bold statements.
Yeah, right, but it's true. It's
Well, I think the problem I saw with it was, as you go further along in the text and talk about Darwin and evolution and natural selection and all that, I mean, there isn't a lick of evidence
No.
to validate any of that, yet supposedly smart people
Believe.
subscribe to it.
Mhm.
And if you can put your faith and belief in something that hasn't been proven, how is that any different than what we're doing?
It's not,
Exactly.
that's the whole point, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, because you go to two different things. One, do things evolve and change?
Yeah.
Yes.
They do.
Within, well, think about this.
No.
Within its kind,
And it's kind
a
of.
dog mating with a different breed evolves. Okay,
That's not evolution.
that's not evolution,
That's right.
and not in that term.
And that's at best random selection,
Yeah.
at best.
At best. Okay.
Because one of the other things they talk about is that they have not been able to find any fossils that show any progression of change. In fact, some of the bird fossils, the birds are exactly the same today
Yes.
as they were millions of years ago.
And that, so one of the things, and hopefully, yeah, good. One of the things that we're going to talk just a little bit more, and then what I thought I would do, because it's easier to see it and listen to other people talk than it is for me to try to explain it, is this is a documentary called Is Genesis History? Okay? Written by a guy basically who brought together some experts to go through and look at things, and he's going to talk about paradigm shifts and things like that. But this gets a little bit more into old Earth, young Earth, which is going to set up Ed's for next week. But it leads to some of the same thing that we're talking about of this theistic evolution, which is, you can't hold to theistic evolution and hold to inerrancy of Scripture, all right? Sufficiency of Scripture, all that stuff, because Scripture and theistic evolution are totally at odds. They start out both agreeing God created, but then we try to make this compromise with Darwinism. And you have to remember, Darwin is only in the 1800s. All right, so this did not exist. I mean, this is we're 100 plus, yeah, something like that years old with Darwinism.
Yeah.
Okay, and it is a theory that's never been proven. Okay.
The one question that's never been answered, I don't think, is where did the protein or amino acid come from?
Well, that's where you get the theistic people, theistic evolution, which are Christians. All right, say God started it, He created it all, and then He left. Or it's secular at that point, and material either always existed or the aliens planted it.
So Chris, this morning, I think it was this morning on Nova, or it was last night, either one on PBS, talking about you changing kind. They were showing taking two wolves, I don't know if anybody saw it, and mating the two wolves that were tamed, and then they began breeding tamed wolves that almost looked like a dog and were tamed. Now that's in kind.
Here's the thing. That's in kind.
That's exactly the point of
That's
what you're
in kind.
saying. It's so interesting because I was thinking it was about about what we're studying, and they showed it, and they showed these dogs, and the aggression face changed a little because they did two tamed wolves that looked tame, and they breeded them, and they kept on breeding. They were showing it. Yeah, but that's in kind, and it did change the look and how they act.
And I've jumped to page 11 because I like this quote, which is in the middle of page 11. Berkhoff, who is a theologian, says theistic evolution is really a child of embarrassment, which calls God in at periodic intervals to help nature over the chasm that yawns at her feet. It is neither the biblical doctrine of creation nor consistent theory of evolution. So it basically destroys both. All right? And, they go on in this to talk about the differences. What does evolution mean? Okay? Because you have microevolution, which is small developments within a species. All right? I don't think, in my own mind, that you can debate microevolution. Think of the flu virus. Mm-hmm. It mutates, okay? By its environment, it mutates, all right? Now, I'm not going to say it's random, because I don't think it's random, all right? But it does change.
Roaches change.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's what we do that makes it change.
Yeah, that's true.
Because what we'll do and I'm not a biologist by any stretch of the imagination, but we'll sit there with a flu virus and attack a strain, and that ends up changing the virus by what we do. What are you gonna say?
This is a protection mechanism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. But then you get macroevolution. All right, we've never seen that. And we've never seen that. All right, we've never seen the Darwin theory of evolution, macroevolution, ever in practice. So, y'all good?
Yeah, we're good. We
All right.
believe it.
Well, the one question that I always come back to that I've never been able to come up with a good answer is, we all know and agree that there were dinosaurs on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
We all know and agree that there isn't any recorded history of them anywhere from recording of time forward, either by word of mouth or by written account. So how does that then become part of figuring out how old the Earth is? Because that goes back supposedly
millions of years. So he's going to talk about that here in a second.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that is one thing that comes in there. And I am no expert on answering this question, and I would point you to Answers in Genesis with this question, because they have like frickin' PhDs talking about the dinosaurs and how it fits in. It's part of the creation. It's part of the Creation Museum. Answers in Genesis is Ken Ham's.
Oh, that's a book?
Yeah.
No, it's an organization. So
I thought you meant go to Genesis.
No. Hey, go to Genesis. No, Answers in
The book of the Bible.
Yeah, Answers in Genesis is a organization. There's two big organizations. Answers in Genesis, and then
It's interesting.
Creation. What's the Creation Research Institute? No, the Institution for Creation Research. Both of those, I mean, you can spend a lifetime just reading what they've produced. And it's a lot of really, really smart people that are talking about it at way deeper levels than I'm ever going to understand. But
Well, I still hope that they're thinking that God did it.
they do.
Yeah,
Both
yeah,
of
these.
now, Answers in Genesis is definitely a young Earth group. Great.
We don't care.
Good. All right. I am not going to argue with anybody on young Earth, old Earth, because the Bible doesn't tell us. Okay. I think there's room for discussion when it comes to young Earth, old Earth.
Maybe
Because-
the reason he didn't put anything in the Bible or his teachings about those type animals is that it had nothing to do with us.
The story of the Bible.
The end story.
If you look at the story of the Bible, and I'm going to go down the rabbit trail for a second, and then I'm going to come back, and so we get started with this, because we're not going to be able to finish this because it's like a 2-hour documentary. But the first part of it, I mean, it's really good. But the Bible. What's the purpose of the Bible? The purpose of the Bible is to tell us how we can come back into a relationship with Christ.
Christ.
It's a story of redemption,
Mhm.
all right? And it's
It has nothing to do with
now,
all of
you know, you get people that say that the Bible is not a textbook when it comes to the physical universe. I'll agree to a point, but the stuff that it says about the physical universe, about creation, about is the planet round, you know, you get that kind of stuff, is correct, you know. So what is its purpose, and who is it written to? All right, because you got to remember that Old Testament and the Pentateuch was written to God's people who just happened to be around 4,000 BC, or 4,000 BC to 1400 BC. Okay, and they were in Mesopotamia, where he talked the language that they could understand. All right. So he's not. You got to put the context around. So bring it back to the trail. So this talks about basically the physical evidence that we have when it comes to the age of the earth, fossils, and the science around it. It's awesome. We're gonna play it until we find a nice place to stop that's close to the time to end. I highly recommend, if you want to get this, you can get this anywhere. It's Genesis History. It came out in 2017. They showed it in the theaters again in 2018.
It's called Genesis History?
Is Genesis History.
I grew up in the country.
Oh, it is Genesis.
Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
This. My dad and I would ride our horses up to these amazing high mountain lakes. We'd ride back into some pretty remote wilderness areas with incredible streams and meadows and wildlife. I love it here. Look at this canyon. It reminds me of the Grand Canyon. You got this little stream, you got these steep canyon walls. How long do you suppose it would take for a stream this small to remove this much material and cut the canyon this deep? This rock has a history, just like I do and just like you do. It came from somewhere. A lot of these rocks have been dated to be 350,000 years old, up to 2 million. That's pretty old. But it might surprise you to know that all of the geological formations that we see here, the canyons, the layers, even the plants, are younger than I am. When I was born, there was nothing here but a vast forest, hundreds of feet below where we're standing right now. In fact, before 1980, most people had never even heard of Mount St. Helens. It was in that year, on May the 18th, that molten rock created a steam blast with a force of 20 million tons of TNT. Avalanche debris and other flows from the eruption laid down all of those layers rapidly, up to 600 feet thick. A couple years later, there was some more volcanic activity that created a mud flow that cut out this entire canyon. It also cut through deep bedrock, all in a couple days. Isn't it amazing what a little bit of information from the past can do to help change your view of the present and the present world around you? There are a lot of assumptions made by a lot of people about the history of the earth around us. The question is, how do those assumptions affect how we view that history? But more importantly, how do they play into how we view science and the Bible? Did God create the world in a few days or billions of years? Is mankind descended from apes, or did God create us instantly in his image? Was there a global flood that destroyed the earth, or is that a myth? In other words, is Genesis history? we think about the history of the Earth, there are a lot of things we need to consider. But one of the most fascinating is the account of the flood. Was the whole Earth covered with water? Genesis says the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. So if the flood was truly global, wouldn't there be a lot of evidence? I'd heard of a scientist who had spent over 40 years studying this question. When I spoke to him, he said he had a great place where we could see evidence for the global flood. Steve, I gotta admit, I've been here several times, and every time I come here, it is breathtaking.
Yes, besides being at home, Grand Canyon is my favorite place on earth.
Yeah. So, Steve, tell me, what do you see here?
When we look at Grand Canyon, we see the inside story to the ground beneath our feet. And we kind of have a layer cake here, don't we, of strata that have been eroded for our benefit to see the inside structure of the earth. These same layers are also in Colorado, are also in Illinois, also in Pennsylvania.
So when you say sedimentary strata, you're talking about the layers that we see?
Yes. So the lowest layers are formed first. Those are sediment grains that were mixed, separated, and flowed in here from different directions and accumulated one on top of another. And then, of course, naturally, they convert to rock.
So you're saying that the solid ground we're standing on right now, if we went back in its history, it'd be liquid?
Yes. So the ocean is doing some amazing things, and water of incredible power is depositing the layers we see in the canyon.
And are there fossils in all of those layers?
There are marine fossils through all the layers. But the standard explanation is there were 17 different advances and retreats of the ocean over the North American continent. And it was extended over hundreds of millions of years.
And what is the evidence that you see here that would say that doesn't seem to make sense?
The 4,000 feet of flat-lying strata in the canyon are flat. And relative to one another, we look in between the strata layers and we don't see the passage of time in between layers.
You mean erosion?
Erosion, especially in channeling on any great scale, is not visible. And then we look at the strata themselves, and they provide evidence of rapid, very rapid sedimentation. Just minutes or hours is all that's needed to make layers.
Well, tell me about the story of these layers. I mean, how did they get here?
In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. My understanding is the ocean floor upheaval occurred. Some type of magma or earthquake propelled the oceans over the continent.
So that's why we get these marine fossils in these layers.
Yes, and we have 6 months the waters prevailed upon the earth. Another 7 months or so for the water to subside. The 4,000 feet of strata probably represents the early and middle part of the global flood right here in Grand Canyon. We have other strata locally in this Grand Canyon region. That's called the Grand Staircase. We have about 10,000 feet, 2 miles thickness of strata on top of the Grand Canyon.
Higher than where we are.
Higher than where we are. And that represents the later stages of the flood and the retreat of the floodwater. This surface was beveled by retreat of floodwaters. And as the flood retreated into the newly formed ocean basins, then the continents probably uplifted, and the ark, of course, was landed in the high country in the Middle East.
Well, there's some people who say that record is about a local flood.
I believe it's a global flood, and all the high hills or the whole heaven were covered, a universal statement. But the mountains have risen since then, and we shouldn't measure the depth of the floodwaters by the present mountains of the earth, which are largely created during the flood and after the flood.
Well, the fact that we have all of these layers would be unknown to us if we were standing on them, somewhere else. But they're known to us because they've been cut out. How did that happen?
Well, it was a story that we all learned in grammar school. Okay, Colorado River, over tens of millions of years, cut the Grand Canyon. Most geologists have jettisoned that idea. It's hard to sustain a canyon like this for tens of millions of years. You can't imagine a canyon enduring that long with erosion.
Is that because it would have eventually, the sides would have collapsed and
Yes.
broken down? then how in the world do we get this all carved out?
Well, there are lots of theories, and personally, I like the idea of catastrophic erosion by drainage of lakes.
So after the flood, we have these large bodies of water, these lakes that are trapped.
There's evidence of the big lake in the Painted Desert, a place called Hopi Buttes, about 500 cubic miles of water in this huge lake.
And so the dam breaks, and all of that massive amount of water then is now pouring out and carving this.
Yes, and how long would it take to erode Grand Canyon? Maybe weeks, but not millions of years. Time is not a magic wand that solves all the geologic problems of the world. Jettison that way of thinking about millions of years and then start thinking about catastrophic process like you've seen at Mount St. Helens, and that'll help you understand Grand Canyon.
Everywhere we looked, Steve showed me evidence of the incredible power of moving water. He quickly laid down these enormous layers, then quickly eroded them away. Steve wanted to show me where the floodwaters first hit the continent, so he took me deeper into the canyon. Steve, when you said you were going to bring me to the bottom, you weren't kidding, were you? We're at the bottom, aren't we?
We're in this big side canyon to the main Grand Canyon, and we're looking at the granite basement rock, which is the core of the continent, if you will. And then we see the flat-lying strata on top of it. The boundary between the granite rock below and the peat sandstone above is this surface we call the Great Unconformity.
Why does it appear to be such a stark line? I mean, it's clear.
I think it's an erosional boundary of colossal scale. We're looking at something that shows the magnitude of flood flow over a surface.
And is it just here?
The Great Unconformity is continent-wide. I've seen it, I believe, in the Middle East. It's over in Europe. It's in Africa. And here it is under the North American continent.
So we've got this layer. How thick is this layer? What goes up from here?
Well, we have the Sauk mega sequence here, if you will, 1,000 feet of sandstone, shale, limestone that goes continent-wide. There are 4 other big sequence packages of strata that sit above it. Those are also very continuous like this. What we're seeing here is rather representative of the rest of the world.
It makes one really question the notion that this all happened because of a small local flood. We're talking about something enormous.
The power-moving water was beveling and pulverizing rock, depositing great thicknesses of layers and calling our minds to think about a global flood.
The conventional story is entirely different, though. It would say that there is a lot of time between each of these layers.
Some people have said that the Great Unconformity boundary here represents 500 million years.
You mean between the granite we see and that first layer of the sedimentary rock?
Yeah, they say that maybe 500 million years there. Okay, and that's what their explanation of Earth history would ask them to consider. Yet when you come here and look at this, nearly a featureless plain. It's not exactly a plain, but it's a gently rolling surface. And would that be the product of billions of years? Or would that be the product of the power of water planing off a surface? Time is foreign to a good explanation here. And so we want to explain what we see. Everywhere we look, we see the power of water. And it's water on a colossal scale, and that's the story here in Grand Canyon. It's not a little water and a lot of time. It's a lot of water in a little time.
Yeah, it makes sense. That makes sense.
Time really is the central issue when talking about the history of the Earth. How much time did it take to form what we see around us? It seemed clear to me that a global flood would have transformed the Earth quickly. Yet I know many people think that the world formed slowly over billions of years. What was the real difference between these two views of time? I needed to talk to someone who could tell me more about science and history and time. Since my background is in computer science, we met at a place where I had personally experienced some of that history. As we looked at the exhibit, I was reminded how much smaller and more powerful computers have become since I first started using them. Paul said our changing assumptions about computers were really a series of paradigm shifts.
So when I was 19, I read Thomas Kuhn's classic, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he describes this notion of paradigms. A paradigm is a framework within which you interpret evidence. So really, science isn't just about the evidence, it's about how you interpret that evidence. So this room, for example, we've got so-called mini computers here, but really they're not mini at all in terms of our current paradigm.
Yeah, today, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So really, to understand this question of origins, you really need to begin by looking at the governing paradigms, the two major views that we currently have about the history of life and the history of the universe.
And what are those?
On the one hand, we have the conventional paradigm. In the conventional paradigm, you've got deep time, 13.7 billion years, along which this gradual process, beginning with primal simplicity, ending in what we see today. All the complexity in life has to be built bottom up by strictly physical processes where no mind, no creator, no design is present. The second view we can call, let's say, the historical Genesis paradigm. Everything starts with a divine mind, a creator, an intelligence that plans and superintends and brings into existence reality. Events are happening on a much more recent time scale. The universe, the solar system, our planet, life itself, all of that begins fully formed as a functioning system.
It's not hard to see there's a radical difference between those two in terms of time.
When we look at the history of life on this planet, we've got a body of data, but depending on the paradigm that one adopts, that data will be interpreted in very different ways.
It seems that one paradigm is drawing on a history that was given to us.
Yes.
And another paradigm is constructing that history. Is that how you say that?
We have a witness to those events, and that witness is telling us this is what happened, and we have to take that into consideration when we evaluate the data.
Well, Paul, the reason this becomes serious is that we're not talking about a history of just boiling water at a certain temperature. You know, we're talking about a history that deals with the origin of the universe. It deals with the origin of life, the origin of humanity, the origin of sin and why there's evil in the world, the origin of the geological formations that we have around us, the origin of language. I mean, this is history that is not minor. This is dealing with major elements of humanity and where we are.
Yeah, you're talking about the origin of literally everything. And I think if we zoom out from that and say, well, what really is the difference between these two paradigms? It isn't a question of science on the one hand versus religion on the other, because both of them are scientific in the sense of looking at a common body of data. Really, at the deepest level, the difference is two competing views of history. What is the true history of our cosmos?
That does seem to be the real question. What is our true history? What actually happened? The conflict is not between two views of science, but between two competing views of history. Since Genesis was written in Hebrew, I wanted to talk to a Hebrew expert. What was actually in the original text?
The first word in Genesis is Bereshit. Bereshit, Genesis 1:1 is Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'ha'aretz. So this is the beginning of the Toledot of Noah. Interesting that word Toledot is a very interesting word. It's translated sometimes genealogy, sometimes it's translated history. And what follows then is the account of the flood.
Steve, it seems that there is a lot of history in the Bible. Is that how you see it?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the first thing is that it's an accurate historical account. The presentation is such, and the perspective of the writers, that they believe they were talking about real events.
Okay.
It's very obvious that because of the way in which they insist that the next generation learn their history.
When you look at these early chapters in Genesis, what do you see? Can you take us through this?
It starts with, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. There's no word in Hebrew for universe. That means he created everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing we find in Genesis 1-2, we find a water ball that is in space.
Mm-hmm.
God in the subsequent days is going to fill that universe.
Well, you're talking about days here. Do you see these as literal days? Is that what the text is telling us? Or you know what other people think, that this is just a poetic...
Well, first of all, it's not poetry. The world's greatest Hebraists all affirm that this is a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
They say that that's one of the unique features of the Genesis accounts of creation and the flood, is that they are narratives, because in the ancient Near East, they are done in epic poetry, which is very different. And here we have narrative to indicate that this is historical. What that means is that you should understand the words, the normal way in which this Hebrew words are understood. The word yom, it means day. The foundation of its usage is what we mean by a day. It's a 24-hour day. The only way you'd want it to mean a longer period of time is if you impose an alien concept to the text,
mm-hmm.
and say, well, I think that these are ages, and therefore yom has to mean ages. What you have to do is start with the text.
Yeah.
If we start with the text, yom means day.
So when we come to the passage that talks about the creation of Adam and Eve,
Yeah.
You're seeing that as a clear historical event, which would stand in direct opposition to the conventional paradigm that man evolved out of a long, long process.
The biblical text is not compatible with the standard, the conventional paradigm. The Bible teaches that the Lord God formed man, artistically breathed in the breath of life, created him in his image. And then, of course, woman is created. We have marriage. We have the fall. And then in Noah's genealogy, we have the entire flood account. And the flood, is it a global flood? Well, I mean, I don't know how many times, I think 35 times or so, the word kol, which is all, occurs in the flood narrative. If this is a judgment on mankind, then it has to be global. We continue through these first 11 chapters of Genesis. We come to chapter 10, which is called the Table of the Nations, which are the sons of Noah. It mentions in that chapter that the people are in their different nations and their languages. So Moses goes back in Genesis 11, 1 through 9, and explains how the languages develop. And so we come to the Toledot of Terah. And the Toledot of Terah is not going to be about Terah. It's going to be about his famous son, Abraham.
Mm-hmm. It just seems so apparent that there's no disconnect between all of that and everything that we see in the beginning. It's just one long historical narrative, is it not?
It is. As a matter of fact, the genealogies form the structure, not just for Genesis, but the narratives are embedded in the genealogies. The genealogies are picked up, that's actually called the Toledot, in the book of Ruth, to establish that David is a descendant of Judah, which is required by Jacob's prophecy. And then we move into the New Testament. How is the pedigree of Jesus established? With two genealogy, one going back through Mary's line, all the way back to Adam.
Steve, in light of all of this that we have seen, how important is the historical narrative that we find throughout Genesis, including all of the generations that are laid out? How important is that to Christianity?
It shows that Christianity has a historical basis. It's what the scriptures say, and the scriptures represent actual historical data. So Christianity it's not a leap in the dark. It is understanding that has a very strong historical basis, and that our Savior is also our Creator.
These genealogies are...
Okay.
Oh.
No, we're going to keep going. I wanted to give you a chance. What do you think?
It's good.
I mean,
Very good.
I mean, it's a lot to take in, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, and this goes on for another hour. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's good. So, I mean, any comments,
I
questions?
thought it was interesting, the catastrophic erosion.
Yep.
I love that, and that it was a big flood in little time. You always think it's the opposite, that it's a lot of time and it's a small flood, or a small stream, or it
Yeah.
takes forever. And they're showing you that no, it probably couldn't have. And I've always thought it was worldwide. I always
Yeah.
thought the flood was, didn't y'all always think it was?
But isn't there also scientific evidence that this has happened multiple times? Not where it wiped out necessarily a human race, but, going back before whatever that time
Yeah,
was.
I don't know about multiple floods. I know multiple ice ages
Well, but you can't have an ice age
without
without having
Yeah.
flooding,
Yeah.
you know, because it can't evolve any other way.
Yeah, because I mean, you talk a little bit about mini ice ages. I mean, during the 1700s, during the Revolutionary War, that was in the middle of an ice age, a mini ice age that was going on
But-
because
Is Rich saying after Noah? You're saying like it happened
Yeah.
since, not before Noah.
Oh, yes,
After.
scientific, no, before. No, scientific, they've got, I think, evidence that
I can't answer that.
I don't-
one of the places that they've gone to, I think, is they bored through some of the icebergs.
Right.
And they've got evidence of layers similar to the layers of, in the Grand Canyon that tell them exactly, geologically what the time frame was, at least with what we know today.
what
I
they
mean,
think,
as
yeah.
it's turning out, you know, I'm not sure that any of that stuff is an accurate measurement.
Well, we'll talk. Yeah, he'll talk some more about that. But the one thing that I like that I have not said is it is very important when you study the Bible to know what kind of literature it is. And I think we talked a little bit about that when we did how to study the Bible and read, but probably didn't hit it as hard. And that is, if it is a narrative,
Yeah, that's
it is
interesting.
very different than when it is poetry.
Right.
I mean, Song of Solomon is poetry, okay? The Proverbs are poetry,
Mhm.
okay? They have a way different interpretation than does a narrative. The story of Job, the first couple of chapters of Job are narrative, and then it goes into poetry. And, you know, so you do have to understand the way that the writer wrote it, because look, I'm not going to sit here and go young earth, old earth, and go over it, but at this, you got to look at what he said there. Look at what the words said. And it says day, yo, and yo means day, and day means, you've got to remember, day is evening and the morning, which is totally a little bit foreign to our thinking. But anyways,
Evening and morning.
yes,
Is that what you said?
yeah. If you look at everything, it's the evening and the morning, the first day.
Well,
Which is-
we're in
The
this,
Sunday school class, we just don't.
Sunday school class where we're
Just
talking about poetry
poetry.
and,
We said the same thing.
it's a reference, I think, to trying to understand whether the Bible is really inerrant. It's not a question of whether the information is meant to be truthful and for our use, but because of poetry, there's a lot of flowery language, a lot of superlative language,
Hyperbole, we talk.
Hyperbole.
hyperbole,
Absolutely.
and so that's where I think we also stumble from time to time, is in trying to make the Bible word for word, absolutely positively accurate is a mistake.
I'll go back. I'll hit two things. One is we do have to take the Bible literally and word for word within its original language. I mean, meaning you have to understand the original language to understand the word for word part of it. With that, you also have to put it in context from the standpoint of, listen, when I'm in Song of Solomon and it is talking about, describing a woman and describing a man, that is poetry. All right, so where the Bible is literal, let it be literal.
Yeah, that's what
When it is not literal, when it is a parable, where it is an allegory, let it be an allegory. You know, that's the understanding what you're reading type thing.
I'm trying to, the verse we
We had
studied
Joshua,
was
Joshua.
Joshua
and
10.
it was about that, the book of What, Josh?
Yes, where, because,
What is it? 'Cause I
because,
never
well,
heard of it.
because when you look at the book of Joshua, Joshua is definitely heroic, because when it talks about they killed everybody,
The Amorites were talking
Okay.
about the killing.
that becomes hyperbole.
That's what he was
Yeah,
saying too.
because obviously they didn't kill everybody, because back over here, that person still lives.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Jeshar is.
Jeshar
Yeah.
was the book.
But here's the
interesting.
bone of contention, and not bone of contention, but the thing that is difficult to take literally, because I'm trying to get to the exact verse.
But it was almost that same line we were talking about this morning in the
The
age.
sun stopped in the middle of the sky, this is when Joshua says, and delayed going down about a full day.
Yes.
There has never been a day like it before or since. A day when the Lord listened to a human being. That's never happened according to this. Surely the Lord was fighting for Israel.
Now,
And that was the point.
now, okay, now, I'll go down this rabbit trail, but then I'll come back, because so we can keep going on with this.
Well,
NASA, now, I don't have this study, I don't know where the source is. So take this with a grain of salt from the standpoint of, I'm telling you something that I heard in a documentary, okay? And I don't have any of the proof text. But NASA was sitting there at one time trying to judge time based off of light and all that, and they found that they were missing a half a day.
That's apparently questionable from a number of standpoints,
Yeah.
because they used to use a lunar calendar, and then
It's-
the Julian calendar, and now the Gregorian
Yeah.
calendar.
Oh, listen, not to go too far, because I'm going to get back into this. If you look at the Gospels and the last day of Christ, you're going to get messed up, because the Jerusalem Jews used a different start and end of a day than the Galilean, Jews. So I did this in the men's group once, where you put it all together, because Jesus was using a Galilean thing, and the Pharisees were using the Judea time, start of the day, because they already had their Passover, Jesus, and then the Pharisees were going to have theirs the next day, and you have to line that up. Oh yeah, time is hard looking back.
Well, but my point is that according to the material that Mark has anyway, that I believe he said that's a myth.
And it could be. I mean, I don't have the source, so I'm not even going to go there.
Yeah.
But all right, let's. Oh no, please.
I didn't do it, I swear I didn't.
No, it does this.
I can though.
Okay, let's keep going. You like this?
Incredibly important.
Okay.
If Jesus is descended from Adam, and Adam was created on the sixth day of creation, then the earth can't be very old. So where do the millions of years come from? I met a geologist at a place where he said we could understand this better.
You see the quietness, the expanse, nothing to disturb you. Yet you've got the reminder that it was explosive in the past. There was this volcano back here, the Cinder volcano, and it belched out this lava flow that spilled out across this countryside.
Just a huge amount of basalt, lava.
Yeah, but it's actually small compared to the lava flows that we see in many places. And there's something like 1,000 of these volcanoes around here. And the little one behind us here, we call that a cinder cone volcano.
You call that a little one?
Yeah, well it is. I mean, these volcanoes are small. Mount St. Helens, 1980, when it erupted, okay? The top 2,500 feet of the volcano blew off, but that was small compared to historical eruptions. We can go back a little bit further to the Great Yellowstone eruption, and some of the volcanic ash was down in Texas. It blew that far away. You think about lava flows in India, that you have an accumulation of up to 1,000 feet over an area a third of the size of the subcontinent of India. What we see in the present is really only are minuscule by comparison to what we've seen in the past. And that's telling us something about the historic past. We can't use present day rates of these processes to understand how quickly and how majestically in terms of scale the geological record accumulated.
Well, that is the point that has brought me to you, because how do we determine the age of these rocks?
Well, the important first thing is to recognise that this lava flow is, in a sense, an instant in time. It's an event. And when it's molten, you've got all the different elements that come out of the volcano are all mixed up, and the rock starts to crystallise. Any of those atoms that are radioactive, they now start to accumulate what we call the builder products, the decay products. Now, the point is that this rate of decay is so slow when we measure it in the present that it takes millions of years for parent atoms to decay to daughter atoms. And so that's ultimately where the millions of years come from, the fact that the decay rates in the present are slow.
But we would say that the present is not really the key to the past, because obviously the past holds some massive, massive catastrophic events that are not going on today.
In fact, the Bible would say that the past is the key to the present. If you want to understand why the way the world is today, you've got to understand what happened in the past. So we've got lots of hints that geological processes haven't been at constant rates through time, and we have other hints that the decay rates may not have been constant. See, we've taken rock samples from a number of places, lots of samples in the Grand Canyon of each of these rock layers. I've done it in New Zealand, we've done it in other parts of the world, and what we've done is we've submitted the same samples to more than one of these dating methods. And so what we found is on the same samples with more than one method, we were getting ages that were different by hundreds of millions of years, or even a billion years in some instances. We're seeing huge differences by using different methods.
Well, if there is that kind of a difference between all of these dating methods, then that would seem to confirm the fact that we have an open system here, not a closed one.
And if we have an open system, that means we can't trust it to give us dependable dates for these rocks. And that changes the whole thinking about the history of the Earth, because suddenly now these radioactive clocks are not reliable. We've got evidence that rates were faster in the past. Suddenly we may not be thinking in terms of millions of years. We may be thinking in terms of a history that is much shorter.
But you were saying that this kind of evidence is in the open literature now.
Yes.
Why is it not making an impact?
Well, I've been asked that when I've spoken in university geology departments, and the answer is because there is a commitment to the millions of years. And so once people get locked into that focus, anything outside their field of view that conflicts with that focus is marginalised. And the reason why the millions of years are important, if we go back in the history of scientific thought, Charles Lyell in England proposed millions of years, and they multiplied the ages for the rocks. And that was the foundation on which Charles Darwin built. In fact, he read Charles Lyell's book and was convinced of the millions of years of geological evolution, so he could say, now, given enough time, what we don't see happening in the present, we might only see small changes in the present. Given millions of years, the small changes can add up to big changes. And so if you want to have a way of looking at the history that says that we got here by chance, random processes over millions of years, then you've got to have rocks that are millions of years old. Otherwise you've undermined that whole foundation of that view of Earth history.
So time becomes the critical element for the conventional paradigm,
Exactly.
and that time has to be deep time. Andrew said when you study the rock formations, they show evidence of a young Earth transformed by a global catastrophe. So he took me south to Sedona to see it for myself.
The important thing to note is that this landscape is actually very stable. There was lots of erosion in the past to carve out this whole terrain, but those cliffs and the valley floor are very stable, which is why you've got the vegetation. Today, everything's much quieter. Today's processes are extremely slow, but they can't explain how we got this erosion, how we got these layers, how we got these cliffs.
All right, so you wanted to come here because you see evidence of a young Earth because of what's here. What do you see?
Yes, well, the first thing we notice is the extent of these layers. It's like a stack of pancakes. For example, the red unit that goes all the way across our field of view, that's the Schnebler Hill Formation. And above that, you can see the first white unit is the Coconino Sandstone. And above that, you've got the Turaweep, and at the horizon, you've got the Kaibab Limestone, which is the rim rock of the Grand Canyon. And, you know, here we are, 70 more miles from the Grand Canyon, and these layers are still here.
Yeah. It's almost hard to imagine the volume of material that represents.
Yes, take the Coconino Sandstone. We can trace it from here, right across New Mexico, Colorado, right over towards Kansas and Oklahoma, or even in Texas. We're talking at least 200,000 square miles for this one rock unit that's consistent for mile after mile after mile. That's not the scale that we see today with localised sedimentation. And to get it flat lying like this over such a large area, it's like you have to make your pancake all at once very rapidly. And so these layers show evidence of rapid sedimentation, the extent of these layers.
Well, Andrew, you were talking about that red formation, but that doesn't sound familiar to me.
No, that's the Schnebler Hill Formation. It's not in the Grand Canyon. In the Grand Canyon, we go from the Coconino into the Hermit Formation. There's that knife edge boundary, and there's no evidence of erosion there, which means that the Hermit Formation was rapidly deposited, and then immediately the Coconino was a deposit on top of it. But here, we've come 70 miles from the Grand Canyon, and we've got this Schnebler Hill Formation between the Coconino and the Hermit. And this Schnebler Hill Formation, 800 to 1,000 feet thick, over an area of 1,000 square miles, had to have been formed very rapidly. If that took millions of years, we ought to see millions of years of evidence of millions of years of erosion back in the Grand Canyon at that same boundary. We don't. So that means that this Schnebler Hill Formation in this area had to form in a matter of hours. So it tells you that not only is there a lack of erosion, but there's no time between those boundaries. So the whole sequence of layers was very rapidly deposited.
So we have this large extent of layers. We have the lack of erosion between the layers. What other evidence do you see?
Well, if we look closely, for example, at the Coconino Sandstone, we see the bedding, that there's bands within it that are sloping. We call those cross beds. What they indicate is that you had underwater sand waves were moving along. The comparison is in a desert. It's important to recognise that there's a difference in the angle in a desert dune. It's usually 30 to 34 degrees of these sloping beds. Underwater, it's usually 25 degrees or less. And Dr. John Whitmore has combed the hills around here with his students, hundreds and hundreds of measurements of these cross beds. And they all come in the range of 15 to 25 degrees. So it was underwater deposition. And so these layers are accumulating in hours, weeks, and within months, you've got this whole stack of pancake layers over such wide areas.
So it isn't a difference in believing in those layers that exist.
Not at all.
It's the difference of time, isn't it?
Correct. It's not a question of science versus the Bible. When we're talking about the flood paradigm and the conventional paradigm, we're actually talking about two different views of Earth history.
Those views really are different. Of course, I grew up being taught the conventional view with its long ages and slow, uniform changes. But what was the history of the world according to Genesis? Kurt Wise took me from one fascinating place to another, showing me evidence of fossil forests, explaining the rapid formation of coal, and talking about the complex design of biological systems. Everywhere we turned, he showed me something new about the Earth and its history. We ended up at the entrance to an old abandoned coal mine.
This is leftover remains of the Dayton Coal and Iron Company, built about 100, 110 years ago.
What's amazing is that if you didn't know that history, and if you looked at these rocks, you would think they were very ancient. In fact, if we were in Greece, we might think they're thousands of years old.
It's hard to tell just looking at the structure itself.
Well, Kurt, then I need for you to do something, because I know that the conventional paradigm looks back in Earth history, and it's a straight line. A lot of uniform processes and so forth. But the Genesis history is telling us that it's not that uniform.
Yeah, that's a good point. In 2 Peter chapter 3, it talks about people in the latter days saying, where's the promise of this coming? For all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. That concept that what you see in the present, what's happening right now, what's happening in the creek down below, what is happening in every place on the earth, is the way it's always been. It's always been for all of Earth history. The passage goes on to say, for this they are willingly ignorant. They're not just ignorant of these truths, they're purposely rejecting these truths. And it lists the creation and the flood. These are apparently events, according to the Bible, that aren't like the present.
Right.
And the neat thing is, that's what we see here. That cliff isn't actually in place. That cliff belongs about 1,000 feet up. It's slid down to its current location. That's a pretty big boulder.
That's huge. That's
okay,
massive.
now what kind of process in the present slides blocks that big down? This thing continues for a mile. But inside those rocks are yet further evidence of an event before that that's even bigger, even more unlike the present. And then inside those rocks are also fossils of a time period that's very different than the present. So that, according to the claims of Scripture and according to my own experience, you can't use the present to judge the past, to understand the past. But if you go all the way back to the beginning, you realize that the Bible lays out what I would call epochs of Earth history. Periods that are just different things happening during each of these epochs. That if you lived in any one of the other epochs, you would never understand the previous epoch, because it's so different. The first one is the creation itself. In 6 days, God created the entire universe. He created the planets and the stars, and he stretched out the universe with his outstretched arm. That's obviously not happening today. He's not creating planets. In fact, at the end of that passage, he says he ended his creation work. Then we move into what I call the Edenian epoch, the period of time when Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. And it's very different than the present. We get the impression from that passage, for example, that Adam and Eve, if they had not sinned, would have lived forever. It's hard to even conceive of human beings living forever. So it's a different world, wildly different. How long it lasts, we don't know, but it suddenly terminated with Adam and Eve eating of the tree of the knowledge good and evil, and God cursing the creation. He changed the rules in the universe. Now no longer is the sun going to be able to burn forever. No longer are we going to be able to live forever.
So it's hard for us to even imagine what that would be like, because we only see the laws are...
And we wouldn't have come to that conclusion if we didn't have the Word of God.
Have this.
And that's what I think the Word of God...
Did you turn it off?
I don't think I did. What happened?
It's good. We were just right into it, though. I'm confused a little bit.
Yeah, because these epochs are cool.
Yeah. Epic periods. But they did
Seriously, I didn't do anything.
Yeah. But they did say that the rocks were different. That's confusing to me about the different, the time of the rocks, the different ages of the rock.
Well, that gets into geology.
Yeah, but then that makes it sound like it wasn't all done at once.
Well, he's talking about the time that it took to create them, though, too.
He was saying how old they were.
Well, from what it sounds like, it's, they could have been actually created in literally minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, but how could some of them be older than the others in the same place? Or the rocks from the same formation? That's what I'm thinking he said.
I didn't hear him say that.
They were talking about this rock and that rock and that rock. Is it that?
Yes.
He's authorizing it.
Students, hundreds and hundreds of measurements of these
Okay,
prospects.
you're gonna get a
And
little bit.
they all come in the range of 15 to 25 degrees.
Yeah, you're right.
So it was underwater
Or
deposition.
Irish or English or New Zealander or somebody.
So these,
That's good.
It's hard to tell just looking at the structure itself.
Well, Kurt, then I need for you to do something because I know that the conventional paradigm looks back in Earth history, and it's a straight line, a lot of uniform processes and so forth. But the Genesis history is telling us that it's not that uniform.
Yeah, that's a good point. In 2 Peter chapter 3, it talks about people in the latter days saying, where's the promise of this coming? For all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. That concept that what you see in the present, what's happening right now, what's happening in the creek down below, what is happening in every place on the earth, is the way it's always been. It's always been for all of Earth history. The passage goes on to say, for this they are willingly ignorant. They're not just ignorant of these truths, they're purposely rejecting these truths. And it lists the creation and the flood. These are apparently events, according to the Bible, that aren't like the present.
Right.
And the neat thing is, that's what we see here. That cliff isn't actually in place. That cliff belongs about 1,000 feet up. It's slid down to its current location. That's a pretty big boulder.
That's huge. That's
Okay,
massive.
now what kind of process in the present slides blocks that big down? This thing continues for a mile. But inside those rocks are yet further evidence of an event before that that's even bigger, even more unlike the present. And then inside those rocks are also fossils of a time period that's very different than the present. So that, according to the claims of Scripture and according to my own experience, you can't use the present to judge the past, to understand the past. But if you go all the way back to the beginning, you realize that the Bible lays out what I would call epochs of Earth history. Periods that are just different things happening during each of these epochs, that if you lived in any one of the other epochs, you would never understand the previous epoch, because it's so different. The first one is the creation itself. In 6 days, God created the entire universe. He created the planets and the stars, and he stretched out the universe with his outstretched arm. That's obviously not happening today. He's not creating planets. In fact, at the end of that passage, he says he ended his creation work. Then we move into what I call the Edenian epoch, the period of time when Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. And it's very different than the present. We get the impression from that passage, for example, that Adam and Eve, if they had not sinned, would have lived forever. It's hard to even conceive of human beings living forever. So it's a different world, wildly different. How long it lasts, we don't know, but it suddenly terminated with Adam and Eve eating of the tree of the knowledge good and evil,
rebelling,
and God cursing the creation. He changed the rules in the universe. Now no longer is the sun going to be able to burn forever. No longer are we going to be able to live forever.
So it's hard for us to even imagine what that would be like, because we only see the laws are...
And we wouldn't have come to that conclusion if we didn't have the Word of God.
Didn't have this.
And that's what I think the Word of God has been given to us for. So we slide into the third epoch of time, what I call the antediluvian period, the period before the flood and after the fall of man. It's a world that's different than the present. It's got the same natural laws going on, but it's a different set of critters, different set of plants. It's a little bit warmer earth. The continents are in different positions from what they are now. It looks significantly different.
Well, that's what we see in Peter, where it talks about that world being destroyed. So the flood was not just soaking everything. This was radical change, wasn't it?
Yeah, if we're right about what we've understood so far, we got continents moving, smashing together, creating mountains. Mountains are rising to tens of thousands of feet. You've got water washing across entire continents. We're ripping thousands of feet of sediment off of the old continents and then depositing thousands of feet of sediment on top of them again. We're looking at earthquakes of astonishing power.
So this change then from what you call the antediluvian epoch, Now into the post-flood.
Basically, the Earth has got to recover from a global flood. The atmosphere's got to recover, the geology, the rocks have to recover, plants and animals have to spread across the Earth. You got lots of water, humongous earthquake, humongous volcanoes, and more or less that period of recovery is a slow decrease in intensity and frequency of those things.
So would it be in that period that we would see the Ice Age, for example?
Yes, that's ironically, the Ice Age turns out to be, in our modeling, a consequence of the heating of the water during the flood. Water is evaporating off the oceans, that cools the oceans. The water is then moving over the continents and dropping enormous volumes of water. Now, in certain places, the rain's going to come down as snow. But coming down so rapidly and without break that it can't melt and accumulates into thick sequences of ice until they're miles thick. And then when the oceans had cooled enough that that rain generation system had stopped, then those glaciers then collapse under their own weight, melt back to the current position, and they're continuing to melt. You know, this thing, global warming, it's recovering, the Earth is still recovering from the flood.
So that was really a fairly tumultuous era
I never thought
right
about
then.
that.
I hadn't either.
But then you have one final epoch.
So the modern epoch is you can study present processes and understand things fairly readily back to within a couple of centuries of the flood.
And so that would lead one to think that these processes, if you take them all the way back.
Precisely.
Right.
You take the present processes and extend them into the back. And that's what 2 Peter says. That's the error people make. It's reasonable. Take the present and extend it into the past. Not unreasonable. So you need to go to the Bible to find out the necessary information to reconstruct it. And looking at it the other way, if you start from the Bible, you only get the beginning of the story.
Right.
God has given us the ability to read the rocks and fill in the rest of the story.
Yeah.
And we need to fully understand the flood. We start with the Bible, but then we go to the rocks. Speak to the rocks and they shall tell them what has happened in the past.
So a while ago you were saying ice.
Okay.
You meant,
That's probably-
you meant glaciers, didn't you?
Good
You
place
said
to
icebergs.
stop.
That's
Or
a
you
good.
mean icebergs? You meant glaciers, yeah.
Yes.
My word.
That's a good place to stop. What do you think?
Yeah.
It
Interesting.
explains a lot.
More than we thought.
Well, yeah.
The signs in all the national parks need to be changed because they're all like the millions and millions of years.
Well,
That wouldn't be convenient.
No, he's they're committed to the millions of
Well,
years.
I gotta tell you, I have a feeling. I know Ed as a scientist, he's gonna come in here looking at the at it all, and that's good. You need. I think the way that we all have to learn is you have to listen to the views.
yeah.
Not argue, listen.
Listen.
Exactly.
But what
What
you
you said
do
today.
is you're filtering that with the knowledge of God's word.
Exactly.
And that if you're taking everything you hear and filtering it through that worldview, all of a sudden things start to make sense. This idea of paradigm shifts and the different epochs, all of a sudden you're sitting there going, okay, this makes now this makes sense. And if we see it in our own world. Last October, we had a massive flood.
Yeah.
That changed the geography of Lake LBJ, and it changed it in a week.
Yeah.
Okay, we see it, but we don't think about that. And that was like, if you think about that in comparison to a global flood,
Well, yeah.
I mean, that changed the sediment of that lake. It changed the flow of that part of the lake, and it happened in really a weekend.
Yeah, it really was.
But in my mind, as I read about it, I just saw that the water's receding and everything's just like it was before. But that's not true.
No.
With all that mass of water, it couldn't be. It had to change.
What?
Exactly.
Some people, when you talk about the flood, think that the axis of the earth changed. because the continents changed. You know,
We just said that.
yeah, we talk about continent shift. We think that happened over millions of years. Well, man, when you think, I mean, we just look at our own lake, which is a miniature version of things, and see what happens with one big event.
Yeah.
Imagine a global event. Yeah. So hopefully that was good. It was probably way better than me talking the outline. Read the outline, read the book, read all that stuff. But I think when you see it, and I highly recommend that.
But didn't you remember that part about the ages of the rock he was showing them?
Yeah.
But was it in the same place?
I don't know.
I know what he was saying, I know now what you mean. The second time through is he said there was a key to understanding and learning about rocks going back before that. That was when this rock formation came down, it also gave them more information is the way I understood.
But it sounded like to me it was in the same place, that it had to be different times.
God bless y'all. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
See you after Thanksgiving.
What time do you want us over on Thanksgiving?
Hey, let me know because I'll have to get another turkey.
Yeah. So Emma, I didn't know what else to tell your old friend. I didn't know what else to tell April. She's gone.
Oh, no. Yes, you did. Oh,
Let's see.
But anyway, Jen approached me with April right there when I came in for the meeting. And she said, she wants to come. Could you come? And I said, yes, how are you?
That'll work.
13 to 9.
Okay. That was so good.
I'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Final?
Final. Yep.
Oh, they made it close, but,